Okay, so last week we looked through the different options for working with changing this balance between the alpha nervous system, the alpha motor system, and the gamma nervous system. And in particular, I was talking about the ways, the different approaches, the different techniques over the years that have been developed to create this specific reduction in the so-called gamma gain. So we looked at gamma bias, and then the way that that can become overexcited or upregulated, and so we start to get an increased sensitivity in the muscle spindles, and that leads then to this tightness in the body. And one of the methods that I talked about was this strain counterstrain for the autonomic nervous system. So I'm going to start by showing a little bit of that work. A lot of people don't know about it, and it's quite interesting work, and it's very low force. So we've got work here that's really at the very low, at the end of the spectrum, where there's almost no force involved. And so this comes from the book, Counterstrain for the Autonomic Nervous System. And this particular release that I'm showing is for the pelvic diaphragm. And so in Sharon Weisselfischer's book, the positions are very specific, and there is a tender point that might alert you to the need to do this. But at the same time, I've found over the years that I've been doing it that most people are tight in their diaphragms, pelvic, respiratory, and so on. So I'm not going to do the tender point test, I'm just going to set it up according to the directions. So that's basically at about 70 degrees at the hip and about 70 degrees also at the knee. So something like this. And then I put my hand across the pelvis, so that's just below the iliac crest. So between the iliac crest and the trochanter, and that hand applies maybe about 1 kilo of weight towards the ground, so not much at all. And then my right hand, the distal hand here, I'm going to lift up the feet about that far away from the table. And that's the position for the release. And so in strain counterstrain, we have the instruction to do 90 seconds. And in Sharon Weisselfischer's work, we have the instruction to do the work from 90 seconds up to 5 minutes. So it'd be a bit like watching grass grow if I do the full 5 minutes like this, but I will do a cycle of 90 seconds. And I'll describe what I notice as we go along. So at the outset, one of the things that I'm noticing that under my left hand, there's a feeling of softness going through the whole pelvis. So it's almost as if my hand descends down a little bit. You know, in terms of measurements, it's probably, microns of motion or a millimeter or so, but there's a definite sense of something releasing there. So that's softening. And then quite often as that starts to let go, suddenly the weight becomes more apparent in that distal hand. So in this case, my right hand, as I'm doing holding this position, so it's very passive. Strain counterstrains is passive for the patient, but as I'm holding with that distal hand, you'll quite often feel the weight of the legs just becomes more apparent, sort of basically relaxes into that hand more. So I'm still waiting for such a thing. I certainly have felt softening around my proximal hand. So the releases are never dramatic, but they can be, certainly quite noticeable, get this progressive sense of kind of yielding and softening. And then one of the ways in which the release starts to become more apparent is that the person will twitch quite often. and they'll start to go into quite a strong parasympathetic state. So they'll go into that kind of pleasant, dreamy state of parasympathetic nervous system. So that's around about 90 seconds. And so that's in Sharon Weiselfischer's work, that's in some ways the kind of entry point. And then if you have some defacilitation that starts to happen, then you hang on and you might end up, as I mentioned, being there for 5 minutes. But I'll call it time here. And so it's mostly just to introduce you to some of the ways in which she proposes working with these ways of basically down-regulating the overactive gamma nervous system. And so in this instance, it's just specifically for the pelvic diaphragm. Okay.